The views and opinions of our guests are personal and do not represent those of their institutions or Applied Prevention Science International.
Thank you very much for being here. I'm Zelie Sloboda. I am the president of Applied Prevention Science International. And it gives me a great deal of pleasure to have these prevention talks. We try to bring the latest information in a variety of topics to our prevention community. And today we are going to hear from Dr. Kris Bosworth, a long-term friend, on building the capacity in schools for prevention and safety. And I'm going to turn this over now to Susan.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today. We're here welcoming Dr. Kris Bosworth, who is currently Interim Director of the Educational Leadership and Policy Program at the College of Education at the University of Arizona in Tucson. She holds the Lester L. Roberta D. Smith Endowed Chair in Education, with a focus on the prevention of substance use and other behaviors that put young people at risk. She teaches courses on school climate, the administration of prevention programs, professional development, and educational change. She has combined her background in education with her training in prevention science. And this has created processes that enable counselors and other educators to implement and sustain evidence-based strategies at all levels of implementation. Her model, Protective Schools, focuses on creating school climates and cultures that act as a buffer to risk-taking behaviors. This model, which includes an assessment, has been widely circulated in schools nationwide. Dr. Bosworth is also a member of APSI's Science Advisory Group and the editor of Prevention Science in School Settings, Complex Relationships and Processes in the Advances in Prevention Science Services. Today, Kris will discuss how school safety can be an important foundation for building school climate and other prevention programming in schools. I'll turn it over now to my colleague, Maria.
My apologies, I was muted. Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Zelie. I'm also pleased to add my welcome to Dr. Bosworth for her work in helping prevention professionals to work with schools and their leadership to provide school safety and effective prevention programming. Such efforts have been successful in providing a safe setting for student learning, as well as opportunities for providing effective school-based prevention interventions. Well, first, there's a couple of housekeeping issues that we want you to keep in mind. Please note that we are recording this session so we can make it available for those who aren't able to join us, and also for you to be able to review and revisit ideas and be able to share with your colleagues too. We try to make our talks very informal, so we welcome your comments and questions out loud or throughout the chat. You just only need to use the raise hand feature of Zoom, and we will call you in the order that you raise your hands. And also, we like seeing you, so if you don't mind keeping your cameras open, that would be great. So that's about it in housekeeping, and thank you, Kris, for joining us. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Zelie, Susan, and Maria for your nice introduction, and then also enjoyed working with you over these many years. And many of these ideas have been bounced off the APSI staff. So we're going to talk today about building capacity in schools for prevention. And I want to begin with the end in mind, and that keeping students safe in schools is multidimensional. There are several different scenarios and several levels of expertise and training that are needed. But the big picture, or the title, school safety, encompasses many things that we've worked in silos for prevention, like harassment and bullying, substance use and sales, discrimination and microaggressions, adverse childhood experiences, assault, theft, violence, and other criminal activities. So those are under the umbrella of school safety. And clearly what we are presenting in school safety are based on lessons learned and research findings from prevention science. So a little bit about me. I began my journey as a mild-mannered middle school social studies teacher. And then I became was an educator working in a day treatment program for adjudicated adolescents. I moved to the University of Wisconsin and Madison in the 70s and 80s as a research scientist, developing computer-based prevention interventions for teens with funding from the Kellogg Foundation and NIDA grants. I moved, after I received my PhD, I moved to Indiana University and developed a Center for Adolescent Studies, and again continued to work in computer-based prevention for teen violence with a CDC grant this time. I was a research scientist for a year at the CDC Youth Violence Prevention Team in the mid-90s, and then was appointed to the endowed chair at the University of Wisconsin. And with that opportunity, I wanted to change my focus away from working with individual students to change their behavior, because I saw that so much of their behavior was dependent upon the culture and climate in schools. And that was the issue that I wanted to focus on as an educator / prevention scientist. So with a multidisciplinary group, including counselors, administrators, prevention scientists, policymakers, treatment professionals, we put together a model called Protective Schools, which links drug abuse prevention with the student academics, because schools have as their main mission, not drug abuse prevention or school safety, but student learning and success. And that approach was to provide an environment that buffers or provides a safety net against risk factors and adverse events while supporting education. So what we looked at is the advisory group identified 10 factors that needed to be considered when thinking about implementing prevention programs, school safety programs, because of the complex nature of the schools. So this was our background, our theory, and then we modified the model with grants from a number of federal agencies, plus the Arizona Department of Education. We had a very strong relationship with the Arizona Department of Education, and many of these grants were partnered with them, which reinforced with them some of their activities at the state level. We implemented the Protective Schools model in over 100 traditional and charter K-12 schools through this. And what we came up with, as you try these things out and you see how they work in different contexts, is that we needed to have 3 components to a school safety and school prevention program. I kind of talk about this as a 3-legged stool. You need to have policy that is related to the area. You need to have a positive climate, and you need to not overlook evidence-based prevention curriculum and components. So next, I'm going to talk about those three areas. So why school policy? Well, it is the first step in a comprehensive prevention approach. It gives clear direction to students, parents, staff, and administration. It must be enforced to have an impact. You can't have a big meeting and develop this and put it on the shelf. We have some research on the effectiveness of policy, not a lot and not very strong, but there is some evidence that policies are effective in reducing the amount of the behavior, but not the prevalence of the behavior. What principles say, it's important that adults have a set of policies and procedures in place which are implemented consistently. And then school policies offer guidance in the school community as what's tolerated and what's not tolerated. Then the second leg of the stool, which we're going to be talking a lot about, is the school climate. School climate is defined as the quality and character of life in the school. It reflects the norms, values, relationships, processes, interactions, organizations that occur among and between people in the school. It sets the tone for all teaching and learning, both the formal curriculum, which is what a textbook, what a teacher is teaching, and the informal curriculum, which really is the climate and the relationships that are developed in that school. It's critical to student connectedness, and connectedness is a term I'm going to be talking a lot about later. We'll define it more broadly. what we do know from research is that the greater the student feels connected, the less substance use and disruptive behavior. So the climate in and of itself becomes a prevention intervention. Principals say that school climate is the feeling you get when you walk around campus of positive, you note positive, respectful behaviors, mutual respect, and just happy people. So here's how this works in terms of climate and student success. That you have a positive school climate, students then feel that they have an adult they can talk to. They have they belong, which is an equity issue that we'll talk about later. And as they have low risk, high challenge, then that leads to more positive outcomes in terms of both behavior and academics. So we've talked about policy, we've talked about climate. So the third leg of the stool is, why do we want to do prevention evidence-based curriculum and programs? This is often where historically prevention scientists have landed first in terms of developing these interventions. Why do you do this? Because then you have precious few dollars in the education system, and how do you spend them wisely so that you are the likelihood of getting the best results? Their demonstrated effectiveness through research. The other thing is that educators can, instead of developing a new program for each school or each district, they can focus on fidelity of delivery rather than development. So precious time, precious money is saved. And there's some PR purpose in it, in that you can garner support from parents, community, and potential funders when you're using evidence-based curriculum and programs. So that's sort of the three-legged stool, three legs that are critical in terms of school safety and prevention programs at a school level. Back to the programs, as the principal said, with the name of this curriculum, I feel confident that our students will get information they need to make good choices. The evidence is really strong, so that educators are looking at that evidence as well. So as I said before, the main job of a school is teaching and learning, is academics. And so how can we present climate as critical to that academic success? So this is again, another three-legged stool. If you're going to have optimal student learning, you need an excellent curriculum, you need strong instructional skills, and you need a positive climate. You are missing any one of these three, and you're not going to have the desired outcome of more student success. So for example, you have a terrific curriculum developed by scientists, behavioral science and educating scientists, but you have instruction that's weak. Teachers that are not well trained, or teachers that have other stressors going on. The benefit of having that terrific curriculum is not going to be as strong as if you had strong instruction. So what we talk about when I am and my colleagues are selling schools and principals and school leaders on why they should focus on climate, why safety relies on climate, this is a three-legged stool that makes sense to them, because they are always need to invest in this the academics, and everything they need to justify in terms of academic reasons. Okay, so what's the relationship between safety and climate? In an environment that is free from threats and violence and other criminal behaviors, it gives students the freedom and the space to, if you look at neuroscience, the space to feel connected to the school and able to participate in its major functions like teaching and learning, that they may otherwise, if they feel like the environment is threatening to them. So connected and safe are companions in terms of school safety. So a principal said, if kids love their school, they don't want to disrespect their school and let down the adults they care about. They also want to be, they're more likely to report things before they get too big or result in violence. And we're going to talk about that particular component of school safety later. Not later, right now. Right after the Columbine shooting and then after Sandy Hook, the Secret Service embarked on studies of the school shootings and of school shooters. And they had some pretty interesting findings. The link to the report is at the end of this PowerPoint. But what they found was that there was lack of any profile of any individual student or type of school that they could say would be involved in shootings, so that you couldn't just identify, oh, this kid or is going to be a shooter. It wasn't that simple. And they found also that most attacks ended very quickly, that law enforcement, even if law enforcement were on campus, they rarely had the opportunity to intervene before there was serious harm. So what were their recommendations? Well, two of their recommendations that fit nicely into this model are that they want you to create and promote safe school climates and student connectedness such that students trust the adults to protect them. So there's a great deal of pieces of relationships and how you are getting those relationships that feel protective. Students, again, prevention scientists can share about this. Schools need to establish comprehensive targeted violence prevention programs. And we do have evidence-based programs. So these are two of the three components of what we're talking about when we talk about that three-legged stool of school safety. So now I want to talk a little bit about this word connectedness that I've been using a bit. It's a made-up word. It comes out of the staff from the adolescent health study, which was completed in a large study, which was completed in the late 90s, with over 90,000 students, 140 schools randomly selected. And connectedness they defined as a sense of being cared for, recognized, supported, and a sense of belonging. And how did they measure that? I think it's important to think about these measures that led them to link connectedness to prevention and to school climate. I should back up and say the leaders of the investigators in this study, if you're not familiar with, are pediatricians. So they admitted they were quite surprised that schools were a big contributor to prevention. So this is, I have already talked a little bit about this study, which was for secondary school students, and some of those were followed into adulthood. And what they found was the relationship between connectedness, students feeling connected to schools, and risk-taking behavior, both external and internal, followed the same pattern for many behaviors. So it really, the more connected you are to school, the less likely you're going to be using marijuana, cigarettes, and alcohol. Same thing for deviant behavior and violence. More connection, less use, less involvement in those behaviors. And the same thing with internalizing behaviors, not connected at all, very predominantly there, and not very connected, reduces the amount of reported behavior. So it seems like this is an important concept to be aware of as we're looking at climate and school safety. There is a spectrum of interventions from school safety, because we know that generally 99% of the time we are in the area of prevention, where there may be some minor incidents happening, normal kinds of disagreements between students. And so there's a lot of important things that go on in prevention. Intervention is sometimes that happens. It happens not often, but there are times when there will be a bomb threat. There'll be the times that there will be an administrator will hear word of a major fight coming down, or that there is a great deal of bullying on a particular bus route. So there needs to be more intervention, secondary prevention, tier 2 interventions, if you're familiar with that kind of language. And then there are the serious things. There's the serious things of students bringing weapons to class, a bomb or an incendiary device found in a bathroom, all the way to the horrible thing of thinking about a school shooter. And for each of these spectrum, for each of these incidences, these circumstances, with a school safety plan, you need to have some plans in place. You need to have some activities in place for those particular scenarios. So if we're talking about prevention, we wanted school-wide strategies to reduce the likelihood of adverse behavior and incidents. We're not going to have 100% that you will never have anything happen. But it reduces the amount, and it also reduces the amount of day-to-day hassles that administrators and classroom teachers and mental health professions have to deal with. So some examples are of prevention. We've already talked about many of these are positive, supportive school climate, evidence-based curriculum, and one that we haven't talked about but is becoming increasingly important is involving youth in decision-making. In youth, we have developed a strategy where youth were asked to walk around the school with the mental health professional and the SRO with a school map, mapping out where they felt safe and where they felt unsafe in the school. That really helped the adults identify those kinds of things for prevention activities. So that's the first incident. That's the first part of the school safety spectrum. The second part is intervention. And these include strategies that identify and support students with risk factors or signs of problematic behavior. For example, there is a threat assessment protocol. There are a number of them that are developed by law enforcement, by other school safety experts that people can get trained in so that they know if someone, for example, hears a rumor that there's going to be, someone has a bomb or someone has a weapon or there's going to be some more disturbance, the administrators can go through this, and mental health professionals and SROs can go through this protocol and identify the potential risks that are involved. So there's that intervention when something pops up. Then there's the response, which is when something has already happened. And all the adults in the school need to be aware of how they handle that. And what we have, which is after many of the school shootings, we have emergency preparedness programs. We have emergency response plans. We also have acknowledged protocols for crisis counseling, crisis aftercare. And these are strategies. These are things that the leadership in the school really needs to know about, but also the parents and the faculty and to some extent the students need to have information about these. So these are the three strategies for the school safety spectrum. So we talked about prevention, intervention, and response. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the infrastructure to support prevention, intervention, and response. And what may be new for people is that usually we talk about these pieces here, but how do they get to be in place? How do they get to be functional? And that is a part of developing the infrastructure. So I'm going to focus a little bit on that infrastructure. The first component of an infrastructure is a distributed leadership philosophy, which says with the leader, the head teacher, the principal, whomever that is, cannot possibly be responsible for everything, that we need a team approach. We also know that violence and safety are multidisciplinary, so there needs to be some input from mental health professionals, from nurses, from school resource officers, and a number of people, including possibly the facilities management, just a number of people that need to be involved. And so what we promote is a school safety team. And then there needs to be and this team can be very broad and include a variety of professions and expertise. Then there needs to be a threat assessment team. And these are people that are specifically trained to evaluate threats when they come by, whether they come by via cyber, social media, whether they come by a parent reporting, a student reporting, or whatever. Those threats need to be assessed, because not all of them are things that need to be a 4-alarm fire. So there needs to be data for decision making, both internal data and external data. There needs to be staff professional development on an ongoing basis, and this will be very much determined by the internal data as to what the needs are based on referrals, based on incidents, such if there is a suicide among the student population, then that calls for a training in that if that hasn't already occurred. Finally, there needs to be a liaison with the district and the community, so that when the worst thing happens, if it happens, and we hope it certainly doesn't, is that there are the people that you need to call to make a difference and to keep kids safe. And so those can be for example, liaison with the police force can be both prevention, intervention, and response, because in many of the schools, you have school resource officers that teach law-related education, relate to students and teachers, and create that relationship as well. So let's talk a little bit about building teams, because it's the basic organizational structure for developing and continuing a comprehensive school-based climate safety and prevention program, is this leadership team. And the team is responsible for developing policies, meeting regularly, collecting and analyzing data, planning evidence-based interventions, monitoring progress, and communicating with stakeholders. It's part of the ongoing, continuing improvement process. And so when an incident happens, or when something happens, there are a group of people who are well informed about prevention and safety and climate that can be called upon to take leadership action. We'll talk a little bit about creating school policies. Using this team, administrators need to evaluate current policies. For many schools, at least in the US, the states require policies on different aspects that we talk about when we talk about safety and prevention. Some states do not have that mandate, and so it varies state by state. But then the team needs to lead a process to create or update the policies that will reflect research-based practices or standards that are published, such as the International Standards on Drug Use Prevention, and then integrate policies in the life of the school. So in terms of the prevention, what we want to talk about, what the team is doing is creating and communicating and enforcing policy. They're developing and implementing climate interventions such as multi-tiered support systems, PBIS, RTI. This is the CPTED is a environmental scan for school safety, and the protocol for that comes out of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. We're seeing a lot of positive things happening when you involve youth in making decisions about their school and in identifying areas of safety and risk and areas that they feel unsafe in. One of the things that, again, go back to the Secret Service report, is that the students need to feel safe in telling adults about problems. They need to feel like the adults are going to take action. And that increases when students feel like the adults are listening to them. And one other thing is a part of what we're learning more and more about is microaggressions, harassment and bullying, is how do we incorporate social justice approaches into the climate, into the everyday activities of the school, which lead to prevention of those microaggressions and bullying and harassment and those kinds of things. And so also we need student curriculum. And fortunately, the field has developed evidence-based student curriculum. We can't assume that students come to school knowing all the social skills developmentally they're going to need to know. And so social emotional learning, there is a wealth of information on that. Many of the worked with 2 states where the Law Association had curriculum for law-related education, particularly important for the older teens, so that they can learn more about what kind of legal things they're going to face when they become age of majority. And then generally bullying is pervasive and bullying prevention curriculum. But this would be the kind of curriculum for students would be determined by the needs of the school, which would be evaluated and examined in the teams. So intervention, again, we have campus security, and sometimes that's a private source of security officers. Sometimes it is a liaison with the police department. There needs to be behavioral and mental health services, restorative practices, which are getting to be more common in discipline, where if the victim and the perpetrator, there's a process and a structure on how that can be resolved. And alternatives to exclusionary practices. It's very clear from the school to prison pipeline literature that exclusionary practices don't benefit anyone, and in fact have alternative effects both on academics and on behavioral issues. And then we're talking about, if you're looking at a multi-tiered support system, you're looking at tier 2 and tier 3 activities, which are secondary and tertiary prevention. Threat assessment protocols, and we've talked about those as being human threats, where somebody comes into the principal's or the counselor's office and say, hey, I hear that there's going to be a big fight at the bus stop, and somebody has a knife. Versus cyber threats, where someone says, oh, I got an email that was sent out, or a TikTok that described how they were going to shoot up the school, how we're going to intervene in these. And then finally, there's the response. And so again, we've talked about emergency operations and response plan, critical incident coordination, crisis counseling, and aftercare. And all of these you can find through CDC, you can find through different law enforcement websites. There are specific protocols that have our best practice that can be implemented. You're at the state level or the country level, there are probably protocols that fit in with the culture of the state or the country or the school district. But it's important that those are in place, and that that people are trained on those things. Although we are hopeful, and it's the research shows that this is a rare event, that you're going to have something like a school shooting or a bomb found in a trash can. These things are very rare events, but when they do occur, it is a matter of life and death that the leadership knows what to do in terms of the response. So we have to say that, okay, this is really nice, Kris. What evidence do you have that this is worthwhile? So this is evidence from a Safe Schools, Healthy Students grant that we had in coordination with the Arizona Department of Education. We were looking at 55 secondary schools, and the first results are based on reports to the Arizona Department of Education. The last 2 are based on data from the YRBS. So we saw a 90% reduction in schools. 90% of the schools had a reduction in referrals for student aggression. 90% had a reduction in fights on campus. 90% reduction in suspensions. 80% reduction in graffiti and tagging. And then for students, 92% reduction in student reporting 30-day alcohol use, and 96% reduction in students reported being offered, sold, or given illegal drugs on campus. And these are all statistically significant differences that we found. So there's a range of activities We were not specifically going into a school and saying, okay, we want to have a anti-graffiti campaign, or we want to have reduction in fights. These were all the schools identified using data, identified their own issue. So after this model refinement, we put together a comprehensive school safety plan checklist. And Maria is going to put a link to that checklist, please, in the chat, so that you might be able to use that in your own session. And so what we did as outside developers and supporters of schools with coaches and training, is we urge schools to build on their existing school assets and organizations. All schools had some of these things in place. What we were encouraging them to do was to coordinate them, to use data to identify the challenges that they needed to address. And we viewed this as a process as a 3 to 5 year time frame. Our grant was for 3 years, and then we followed up schools and they continued. Excuse me. That this is a continuous improvement process. You don't just do a threat assessment training and say, okay, we're done. We need to continually look at the circumstances, the size of the school, the population. It takes visionary leadership to keep the focus and the continuous improvement. And you need faculty and staff buy-in, which was often the case of the leader having this vision and being enthusiastic and sharing that with the faculty and staff. So what the specifics of what we did, and in terms of create an infrastructure that included a school safety and climate team. Many times we, they had a team and it was repurposed to work on this process. Other times it was the team needed to be formed. The first thing is to assess climate from the perspective of students, faculty, and parents. And oftentimes the school would have access to parent surveys or student surveys, but they weren't using these data. And often they did not have access to, or they had not collected data from faculty. So we felt that was important too. Looking at the challenges, what are the realistic goals for improvement using SMART goals and other traditional strategies for goal setting. Develop an action plan, traditional activity and a prevention planning. Continuous cycle of improvement. And specifically, the prevention and the prevention activities are really bound by the culture and curriculum, culture and climate of that particular school community. But it's clear you need a threat assessment protocol and an emergency response plan in terms of the continuum, the spectrum of school safety. And the relevant staff need to be trained in each of those activities. So we've put together this comprehensive school safety plan checklist and how it's being used. It was part of the state of Arizona's school safety report. It can be an educational tool to present the breadth and scope of the spectrum of school safety activities, along with specifics on how you do them. It can be used as an assessment tool. Where are your strengths and what are the challenges that you have? And from that assessment tool, it becomes a planning tool. It can also be used as an evaluation tool. And it can also be added to, for example, some of the curriculum suggestions are merely examples. And depending on what the needs are of an individual school, district, or country, those things can be added or changed. So that is what we're talking about in terms of school safety encompasses many of the silos of prevention that we have traditionally worked in. We are looking at policy, climate, and curriculum as the key components. One of the key concepts is in terms of the students and involving their voice so that they feel more connected to school. And just that school connectedness and that climate is a major supportive prevention intervention that cannot be overlooked. And so we hopefully have provided some tools, at least a beginning and outline for you to take a look at school safety and prevention in your context, and have a new vision of how you can move forward with some very powerful prevention activities. So the resources are here. In terms of just some of them, if you have any more questions or other I can provide other resources for you. But then I would like to say that's enough of me talking and turn it over to Maria, who's going to facilitate questions.
Well, actually, Kris, I was going to start off.
Oh, I'm sorry, Susan.
That's okay. That's fine. Maria will jump in a sec. I wanted to pose one question to think about while others might come in on the chat. I think from the point of view of prevention professionals who are working to try to do things in schools, are you suggesting that perhaps the focus on safety may be a good inroad, if it would be? As you said, some schools already have teams that are looking at these issues. As a prevention professional, what do you see as those steps? Because we often teach, how to do a prevention plan and substance use, and we focus on almost the same categories. But I was trying to see what's the kind of stepwise approach that prevention professionals might take with their own schools.
Yeah, I think that their schools have a lot of pressure on them, and that there's a strong academic pressure, but you have to frame prevention in the words that they're concerned about, and so safety, which I think encompasses everything that we have been doing and is built on that, is something that resonates much better with administrators, with the decision makers in school than something like substance abuse prevention, because they know that safety issues disrupt. They've seen it in the headlines. They don't want to be another Parkland. They don't want to be another Columbine. And so I think that safety will pique their interest more than if you say, I want to prevent marijuana use, and they're going, no, I don't think so, not, or alcohol use or smoking. Those are not high value things that affect that they see affect academics, or that they see would put them in the headlines.
Right. And do you see, when you were talking about policy as sort of a first step, are those policies, they're strictly safety policies, or in those cases, maybe it does touch on substance use policies which threaten safety?
Yeah,
people's.
I think that they're comprehensive. There's bullying. Often the school will have a separate bullying policy, and they may have a fighting policy. So to look at all those aspects, they probably have, at least in our state, they are mandated to have a bullying policy and a substance use policy. And these policies are very helpful, or they need the policy in order to justify suspension and expulsion in some cases, if they need to do that and have. Sure. We are past the era of drug-free schools or weapon-free schools. Those kind of zero tolerance policies did not show any significant impact. So. And states mandate different policies. The bullying of a bullying policy in the state of Arizona is only about 16, 17 years old. I know that not every state in the U.S. has a bullying policy. So those are things that are local. It doesn't mean that as a school, if you're not mandated for bullying or substance use policy, it isn't important to develop that.
Gotcha. Maria, did you want to pick up some of the questions from the chat?
Yes, absolutely. We have Kelly Garza. She's saying that she has a comment here and says, it's like when our agency wants to discuss gaming, gambling, we present as part of a holistic wellness program, including positive and negative coping strategies, and it's much better received. Kelly, is there anything you want to comment on that?
Sorry, you guys, I couldn't unmute myself. No, I was just saying it was kind of like the same concept, kind of a backdoor approach. You know, when you approach schools, you want to be really, really careful with what you want to say to them, because you want them to have the buy-in right away. So we realized the hard way that we couldn't really talk about gaming per se, but we could talk about holistic wellness, you know, the elements, you know, physical, mental, spiritual, and talk about the coping skills and bring up the fact that there's a lot of kids that use gaming as a coping skill. Well, can that be positive? Can that be negative? And that's how we approach that. So I think that's what you guys were saying with that. Schools are much more receptive if they get something out of it. I mean, we all know that.
That's a good summary. The other thing is who do you first contact in the school? And if you're talking about coping strategies, probably your mental health professionals, your counselors or psychologists would be the first people that would buy into a thought about coping strategies, not your school resource officer or your administrator. And so, you know, that, and then how do you find allies in that profession that can introduce you to people at that level that's important. You know, if you're talking about diabetes or some, well, this time COVID, you want to be making the first connection with the nurse or the medical staff. And so that's, you know, who's going to listen, who's going to benefit the most from that, that intervention.
Thank you, Kris, and thank you, Kelly. We also have a comment from our very own Jane Toady, our community in training. She says, with the focus on mental health related to the pandemic, what do you recommend to prevent school staff from seeing this as being one more thing we have to do? In other words, how do you suggest presenting the bigger picture without this being another add-on?
I think that is so important because schools are under such stress right now. And basically they and are short-staffed. I mean, and so maybe this isn't the time to start a comprehensive school safety plan. But we do know that the teen violence and teen murder is up. I just read that in the paper a couple of days ago. And so the idea of yes, this is getting your protocols on quarantine, on testing, on these other things are the current crisis, and you have to deal with them. But please put on the cannot be ignored that these are issues. The safety is an issue, but there's also a huge mental health issue that they're working on in integrating kids back into schools, because there is a crisis in most schools of depression and anxiety among young people. And having good relationships, a positive climate, is a key factor in keeping that, in helping kids deal with those internal factors. So again, like Kelly was saying, in terms of what's the language that the educator would find most compelling. And that I think school climate is a basic prevention intervention for many things that we've been working on. And I'll use the word silos again, in our silos.
And I just want to speak up briefly about that, Kris. I think in many ways, kids going back to school now, people are looking at that as a positive, that they need the social interaction and need that connection. And I remember reading in the past year, there was a study that was following up on students, they called it bonding.
Mhm.
And in fact, we did a little summary on our website about that, that bonding to school meant that by the time they were 27 or 28 years old, they're into their adult lives, that they had low incidence of many problem behaviors
Mhm.
because they had that connection when they
Mhm.
were at school. So
Mhm.
I think as we look at these issues, that broadening our vision perhaps helps us to find the right access point.
Mhm.
Anyway, Maria, are there some more chats or?
No, at this point, we don't have any more chats unless anyone has one other comments that they want to give or question they want to ask. So this is the time to do so. Zilly.
Is Ilion?
Thank you very much, Chris. That was a summary of a very complex issue. And I think there's the field, as you know, is certainly in the prevention science field, is sort of looking at what we're learning from our research in prevention science and how it can be applied in everyday life. And as you know, many of you are familiar with the etiology model that looks at the environments and the connectedness with the positive environments and how that has long-term outcomes. And I think that's something that you presented very beautifully, is showing that it's not only one behavior that you're impacting, you're really impacting a child's life in many ways, and for them to have a safe space and to feel really good. I'd like to, I don't think we have time, but one of the things, as you know, this is a special interest of a lot of people in the prevention field, is how to integrate law enforcement. And I think that you touched on that very well too. And then underscoring that, for those of you who might not know what's going on, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime has put together a group to develop guidelines for how law enforcement operates within school settings. And I think that that will be an important document when it comes out. And we will definitely put together prevention talk with the UNODC staffers who are working on that for our prevention colleagues.
Can I add to give a shout out to the state of Arizona ADE? We're given the opportunity to hire 120 SRO, school resource officers, for 3 years, and they took the approach of having a 4-day training with the SROs, 1 day each with their sergeant and an administrator. That really focused on teaching them about how schools function and operate, and what various roles the SROs could play. There were several days on law-related education, which was done by the legal professions, and they went into schools very well trained, not the kind of SROs that would yank a kid out of a desk, but really trained in terms of building relationships. Then we came in with the Protective Schools model from a National Institute of Justice grant, and integrated used this model where the SRO, a mental health professional, and an administrator went through some additional training focusing on collecting data, analyzing data, and developing school safety plans within that. And that some of the data that I showed about the Safe Schools, Healthy Students grant was replicated in terms of that both the schools that had a trained SRO that had been trained by the Arizona State Department of Education, and our group saw a reduction in discipline, major discipline and minor discipline referrals to the state, compared to a group of schools that had comparable schools that had no SRO. So it's the SRO, school resource officer, relationship with the police, it gets a lot of bad press and a lot of fear, and we were pre George Floyd, so some of those issues were not addressed by our group in our plan, but training of the SRO and integrating them into the school culture. And I think it went the other way around, that the mental health professional and the administrator understood more about the SRO's perspective, the law enforcement perspective, because they were meeting with them every month or every 2 weeks, and they were working together on plans. It just was a very positive relationship.
Yeah, and it certainly underscores that when we approach these issues, that it's a community problem, and that your idea of creating teams that would include not only in school staff and law enforcement, but also key community service providers. I think, and I know that in the course you put together for us on schools, we talk about building those teams and how important that is to integrate the school into the community. Thank you. Any other questions, Maria?
Let me double check. No, I think we're done with questions from our audience today. Kris, thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. I mean, I think we all learned a lot, and it's great to see that there are these plans in hand, and also for sharing the documents, the checklist, which is very, very helpful as well for everyone who was able to attend. And to remind you that this recording will be up in our website in the upcoming days, and we will be also announcing our next prevention talk soon. So just stay tuned to our newsletter.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Kris.
Thank you, Kris.
That was great. Thank you.